Fishing was always my escape. Some people go hiking, some spend their weekends glued to a television. For me, there was nothing better than taking my small boat out onto the river and spending a few quiet hours alone, disconnected from the busy world. Those who fish know what I mean when I say it was my place of heaven. Just the sound of water moving past the hull and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. I had been fishing that same river for nearly 10 years. I knew every bend, every shallow bank, every spot where the fish liked to gather. I had spent so much time there that it almost felt like a second home. For nearly 10 years, the river gave me peace and a sense of safeness. But the event I'm going to tell you about, in just the span of a minute, took that peace away forever. It was a warm Saturday morning in late summer. The sky was completely clear and the river looked like polished glass. There wasn't a breath of wind. I launched my boat and rowed to one of my favorite fishing spots about half a mile downstream. The river widened there and became much deeper. Large trees lined both banks, their reflections stretching across the water. I picked up my fishing rod, baited the hook, and cast it into the river. The line landed with a soft splash. I watched the ripples spread across the surface in perfect circles, growing wider and wider until they slowly disappeared into the still water. I simply sat there watching the river. Just me, the boat, and the river. In the next hour or so, I caught a few fish, released them, and simply enjoyed the silence. Then I felt something bump into the bottom of my boat. I stood up. A huge fish, I thought. I hoped it would be my lucky day. I stood quietly, listening. Another bump. I grabbed another fishing rod and swung it over my head toward the river. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my chest. A few minutes later, it happened again. But this time, 3 bumps in the row. The boat rocked slightly. This is not a fish, I told myself. A fish doesn't strike the same spot repeatedly. It must be something stuck underneath the boat. The river carried all kinds of debris. Fallen logs, branches, even old tires occasionally. I leaned over the side but couldn't see anything through the dark water. I grabbed a long wooden pole I kept in the boat and pushed it down beside the hull, trying to dislodge whatever was stuck underneath. The pole caught on something soft. I assumed it was a clump of weeds. I pushed again. The object shifted. I hooked it accidentally with the end of the pole and started lifting. The water beside the boat began to churn. At first, I saw long strands floating upward through the water. Then I lifted it again and I froze. It was human long hair. Then a face emerged. I would never forget the terror I felt when I realized that I'm holding a female body with the pole. Her skin was pale and swollen from being underwater. Long dark hair drifted around her face like seaweed. I screamed, almost fell from the boat. Panic took over me. My hands started shaking uncontrollably as I tried to hold the pole with both hands so hard, afraid of letting go. She wore what looked like a light-colored dress that moved gently with the current, but it was her eyes that I will never forget. They were wide open, completely white, staring upward toward the sky, her lips dark blue, half open in a soundless scream. I screamed. I felt I'm losing strength, my hands against my will, lost the grip of the pole and splashed into the water. I collapsed on the boat's floor. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just sat there, frozen, staring at her floating beside my boat. The body turned slowly in the water. The current gently pushed her against the side of the hull. She bumped into the boat. That horrible knocking sound I had been hearing wasn't debris, it was the body. I have to call the police, I told myself. Then another thought hit me. What if she drifted away before the police arrived? Without really thinking, I grabbed the wooden pole again and carefully tried to guide the body toward the shore. I didn't want to touch it directly. The woman moved a few feet through the water before suddenly stopping. I pushed again. Nothing. It felt as though something was holding her in place, At first, I thought she had become tangled in underwater branches. I leaned over the side of the boat and looked down into the water. The sunlight penetrated just enough for me to see beneath the surface. That's when I noticed something metallic disappearing into the darkness below. A chain. A heavy chain wrapped around one of her ankles. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was looking at. I felt a cold sensation run through my entire body, despite the heat of the day. This wasn't an accident. Someone had put her there. I dropped the pole immediately. Every instinct told me to get away from that spot. I grabbed the oars and started rowing toward shore as fast as I could. I didn't stop looking over my shoulder until I reached shore. The image of that chain stayed in my mind the entire way back. I ran up the bank toward the parking area. My legs felt weak. My heart wouldn't slow down. When I finally reached my truck, I grabbed my phone and called the police. Within an hour, police officers and rescue personnel arrived. I brought them back to the location. The body was still there, exactly where I had left it. The recovery team carefully pulled her from the river while officers secured the area. They confirmed what I had assumed. The chain was attached to a heavy concrete block resting on the riverbed. I stayed nearby long enough to answer questions. Then I left. A few days later, investigators confirmed the woman had been missing for several weeks. They didn't tell me much beyond that, nor did I ask. I didn't want details. I already had more than enough memories. For months afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about her face, especially her eyes. For almost a year, I avoided the river completely. Eventually, I started going back. At least I tried, but it wasn't the same. The river no longer felt peaceful. Every floating log caught my attention. Every unexpected sound made my stomach tighten. And whenever my boat drifted over deeper water, I couldn't stop wondering what might be hidden beneath the surface.
I used to dive almost every weekend. Mostly lakes. People always asked me why lakes instead of the ocean, and honestly, I loved the isolation. No crowds, no boats everywhere, just silence. A lot of lakes around the country are surprisingly deep too. Some have old flooded roads, sunken cars, even entire buildings underwater from decades ago. Exploring them always felt like discovering forgotten places, but something happened 4 years ago that shook me so hard that I haven't gone lake diving since. It was late September, cold enough that summer tourists had disappeared. I drove out to a small lake a few hours north of where I lived. I won't say the exact name because locals there genuinely hate talking about what happened. The lake itself looked peaceful. Clear water surrounded by forest. There was a small dock, a bait shop, and one old bar nearby where fishermen hung out. I arrived around noon and talked briefly with an older guy near the dock while unloading my gear. He asked if I was diving alone. I told him, yeah, I usually preferred it that way. He looked at the lake for a second and said, "Don't stay in too long. Water gets strange out there." At the time, I assumed he meant cold currents or underwater vegetation. The first part of the dive was usual. Visibility underwater wasn't great, maybe 6 or 7 feet at best. Lakes are different from oceans. Everything feels enclosed, murky. You can never really see what's around you. That's what always made it exciting. I stayed near the northern side, where old maps showed a wreck of an old airplane from the 1950s. About 30 feet down, I found part of it covered in mud and weeds. The deeper I went, the colder the water became. Eventually, I reached around 50 feet. That's when I started feeling uneasy. Not scared exactly, just uncomfortable. Divers talk about this sometimes. Your body notices things before your brain does. Changes in pressure, silence, darkness. You suddenly become aware that you are completely alone in an environment humans were never meant to be in. I remember shining my flashlight ahead and seeing almost nothing except suspended particles drifting through black water. Then my light caught something strange, a vertical shape ahead of me. At first, I thought it was a tree trunk. I moved closer slowly, but the shape disappeared into the murk before I could make it out properly. I stopped moving. That uneasy feeling got stronger. The water suddenly felt much colder. Then something touched my leg, very lightly. I immediately turned around thinking it was weeds or fish. Nothing there. I checked my fins and tank. Everything looked normal. I remember actually laughing a little through my regulator because I realized I was getting nervous over nothing. Then it happened again. Something grabbed my ankle, harder this time. I jerked instantly and kicked backward, hard enough to stir mud off the lake bottom. My flashlight beam swung wildly through the darkness, and for maybe 1 second, I saw a hand, a human hand, pale underwater skin, wrapped around my leg. I know how insane that sounds. Even writing this now makes me question my own memory. But I know what I saw. The grip tightened suddenly and yanked downward, hard. Panic hit me instantly. Pure survival panic. I kicked violently and twisted my body sideways. My flashlight slipped from my hand and disappeared into the darkness below. That was the worst part. The moment the light vanished, everything became black, completely black. I couldn't see the bottom, couldn't see my own hands. I only felt pressure on my leg pulling down into the deep. Then for a second, I saw a face. I swear it was a face. Gray, lifeless, with 2 black holes instead of eyes. I almost screamed. A cold chill ran through my spine. I started ascending fast, way faster than you're supposed to. I kicked upward with everything I had. For a few terrifying seconds, whatever had grabbed me still held on. Then suddenly, the pressure vanished. I shot upward through freezing dark water until I finally broke the surface, gasping for air. I remember ripping my regulator out and breathing harder than I ever had in my life. I looked around. The lake was completely still. I swam back to shore faster than I thought it was possible. When I reached the dock, my hands were shaking so badly, I could barely remove my gear. I kept checking my ankle, expecting to see weeds or fishing wire tangled around it. Anything that would prove I was imagining. There was nothing. No cuts, no marks. I rushed to the local bar by the lake. A few older locals sat inside watching a baseball game on TV. "There's a body in the lake," I shouted, my voice still shaking. "We need to call the police." A few heads turned in my direction, but nobody seemed particularly concerned. Within seconds, they had gone back to watching the game. I walked straight to the bar. "Did you hear me?" I asked the bartender. "I said there's a dead body in the lake." The bartender was an older man with a long gray beard and a calm, almost tired expression. Without appearing surprised in the slightest, he slowly poured a drink into a glass and slid it toward me. Then he said quietly, "There's no body in the lake, son." "I saw it," I replied, still struggling to catch my breath. "I know what I saw." The bartender nodded. "Every year, at least one person comes in here saying the same thing. Some claim they saw a body underwater. Others say something grabbed them or tried to pull them down." I stared at him. "In the beginning," he continued, "search and rescue teams came out every time. They searched the lake, dragged the bottom, brought in divers. They never found anything." "Maybe they missed it," I said. The bartender shook his head. "No missing persons, no reported drownings, no bodies, nothing. Yet people keep seeing the same thing." "Then what is it?" I asked. The room suddenly felt much quieter. The bartender gave a small shrug. "No idea, but I can tell you this, even if you called the police right now, they probably wouldn't come. They've heard this story before." I picked up the glass and took a long drink. My hands were still trembling. For several minutes, I stood there trying to make sense of what had happened out on the lake. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find one. Eventually, I finished my drink, paid the bill, and walked back outside. I sat in my car for a while, staring through the windshield at the calm, turquoise surface of the lake. From shore, it looked peaceful, beautiful even. After a long while, I started the engine and slowly drove away. I have never gone diving in a lake again.
I've been diving for most of my adult life, not professionally, just as a hobby that slowly turned into an obsession. I loved exploring places most people would never see, shipwrecks, reefs, underwater cliffs. But more than anything, I loved underwater caves. Most divers avoid them, and for good reason. Once you're inside a cave, you can't simply swim straight to the surface if something goes wrong. You have a ceiling of rock above you, darkness all around you, and only one way back out. It's one of the most dangerous forms of diving in the world, which is probably why I found it so fascinating. But one event I'm going to tell you about has changed everything. This happened 3 years ago. I was diving at a coastal cave system that was popular among experienced divers because less than half of it had been explored. Vast parts of the cave that the human eyes have never seen yet. The cave had been mapped, explored, and documented for years. Hundreds of divers enter it every season. The entrance sat about 40 feet below the surface. From there, a network of tunnels extended deep into the limestone rock beneath the coastline. It was shaped like a giant labyrinth filled with dead-end chambers and winding passages that led into even more tunnels. If you didn't follow the map carefully, it was easy to get lost. Those two things, the mystery of unexplored places and the danger that came with them, made my blood race with excitement. That morning, the weather was perfect, the ocean was calm, visibility was excellent. I was in a good mood as I set out on my expedition into the unknown. I descended slowly and reached the cave entrance within minutes. Even after all these years, entering a cave always felt like stepping into another world. The sunlight faded almost immediately, the water became colder. My dive light cut through the darkness ahead as I followed the permanent guideline deeper inside. The cave walls were covered in smooth limestone formations carved by thousands of years of water movement. It was beautiful, peaceful. The only sound was my own breathing. I checked my gauges. Everything looked good. I continued deeper. About 20 minutes into the dive, the tunnel widened into a large chamber. It was huge and connected to several different tunnels. I stayed there for a moment, taking in the vast space around me after spending so much time swimming through narrow passageways. When I turned to leave, I saw 2 identical tunnels in front of me. I couldn't remember which one I had used to enter the chamber. What worried me even more was that I couldn't see the guide rope. For a second, a wave of anxiety washed over me, but I quickly tried to stay calm. Panicking inside a cave was the worst thing a diver could do. I decided to take one of the tunnels. If I didn't recognize the walls or find the guide rope after a short distance, I would turn around and try the other one. It seemed like a good plan at the time. At first, I was confident I had chosen the right path. The tunnel narrowed and then branched into several smaller passages. I continued forward, occasionally checking my surroundings, convinced I would soon find the guide rope again. But after several minutes, doubt started creeping in. I had taken the wrong tunnel. I immediately turned around and started swimming back toward the large chamber. The problem was that after several minutes of swimming, I couldn't find the chamber either. I stopped. A cold feeling spread through my body. For the first time during the dive, I admitted something to myself. I was lost. I forced myself to stay calm and checked my gauges. My remaining air wasn't critical yet, but it wasn't good either. I had enough oxygen to get out of the cave if I found the correct route. Don't panic. Concentrate on your breathing. Breath slowly. Inhale, exhale. I was reminding myself I needed some sign of hope, familiar formation or bloody rope, anything that would give me hope I'm on the right path. But the realization that I might not find my way out started becoming very real. Then my flashlight caught something in the distance, a shape, someone, another diver. Relief hit me so suddenly I almost laughed inside my regulator. I rushed toward him. His flashlight pointed straight ahead into the darkness. It looked as though he had seen something that had made him stop. I didn't think much about it. I was simply grateful to see another human being, someone who would know a way out. I closed the distance and reached out, touching his leg. No reaction. My stomach dropped. I grabbed his arm and nudged it. The diver slowly rotated sideways in the water. His body moved like an object, and then my flashlight illuminated his face. I froze. A muffled scream escaped through my regulator. The diver was dead, and the more shocking realization was he had been dead for a very long time. Large sections of flesh were missing from his hands and face. What remained had turned a dark gray color. His skin clung tightly to the bones underneath. His eyes were gone. The empty socket stared back at me from inside the mask. Enough of his face remained to show the final emotion frozen there. Terror, absolute terror. The look of someone who had realized he wasn't getting out. Someone who knew he was about to die in that cave. My own breathing thundered inside my head. For a split second, I pictured myself floating beside him, dead and forgotten in the darkness of that cave. Another dead diver trapped in the cave forever. Panic started creeping in. I turned away from the skeleton and tried to focus on my breathing. I have to keep moving, just keep moving. I was telling myself while I was swimming further and further away from the dead diver, like I was running away from my own dead. I honestly don't remember how I found my way out. I remember swimming. I remember checking my air repeatedly. I remember making turn after turn through tunnels that all looked identical. And then suddenly I saw sunlight. The faint blue glow of open water ahead. When I finally surfaced, I lay on my back for several minutes, just breathing and staring at the sky. Relief washed over me. Such a happiness flew over my body I've never felt before. I'm alive. I made it out. After some time, I looked around and I realized I wasn't where I had started. Somehow, I had exited through a completely different entrance to the cave system, one I had never seen before. I turned and started swimming to the shore. To this day, I don't know how I found the exit. Maybe instinct took over. Maybe it was pure luck. I honestly have no idea. But what I do know is that somewhere deep inside that cave sits the skeleton of a diver who wasn't as fortunate. I still dive. But I'm not the same person I was before that day. Ever since then, I have followed every rule, no matter how small. That cave taught me respect. Respect for the underwater world, respect for nature, and respect for the value of every day we're given.